In May 1943, Australia was deep in the grip of World War II, a war that stretched resources thin, strained communication, and placed extraordinary pressure on ordinary people. At 1600 hours on May 8, 1943, Captain David Sharp of the Small Arms School at Bonegilla Army Camp, located 9 miles from Albury, died as a result of a vehicle accident early that day. His death marked the start of one of the darkest days in the region's history. Later that evening, as the border towns of Wodonga and Albury settled into the first darkness of night, a long day of training for thousands of troops at Bonegilla had finally ended. Muscles ached, boots were dusty, but spirits were high. The night promised something rare: rest and recreation in Albury, music, dancing, and a few precious hours of escape from the demands of wartime life. At the camp, officers and transport staff knew they had a problem, a growing one. Every evening, hundreds of soldiers and Australian Women Army Service, or AWAS, needed to travel into Albury for the brief relief that kept morale alive in the middle of a grinding war. Dancing, movies, company, but the transport system was stretched thin. Too few buses carrying too many passengers, overloaded vehicles, unprotected crossings, and a railway line that cut directly across the only practical bus route between the camp and the border towns. Concerns were raised, warnings were spoken aloud, some even predicted, with chilling accuracy, that unless something changed, a tragedy was inevitable. But nothing changed. The buses kept running over capacity, the crossings remained ungated, the schedules stayed tight, and the soldiers and AWAS continued to rely on a fragile, overburdened system that everyone knew was one mistake away from disaster. In the evening of May 8, 1943, that unheeded warning came true. The very tragedy they feared arrived in the most devastating form imaginable. A collision that tore through a packed bus, derailed a locomotive, and shattered 25 families in a single, violent moment. It was not fate. It was not chance. It was the outcome of a problem long recognized, long discussed, and left unresolved until it was far too late. At 10 hours that evening, waiting inside the camp to pick up the next load of soldiers, was a black-bodied REO bus, registration DW058, driven by 45-year-old civilian William Henry Lord, licensed to carry 19 passengers. It became packed far beyond capacity. That evening, 35 people squeezed into every seat and aisle. Soldiers filled the rows, sitting and standing shoulder to shoulder, laughing, joking, talking, shouting over the noisy chatter about the dances ahead. At the very back sat 4 members of the AWAS and 1 member of the Australian Army Medical Women's Service, AAMWS, Corporal Aileen Laird, signaller, Irene Burford, signaller, Gwenda Lawton, signaller, Margaret Malone, and Private Anne Anderson of the 106 Australian General Hospital, 5 young women who had trained hard all day and were ready for a night of music and dance. The rowdy, smoke-filled bus began the slow 9-mile journey to Albury. It gathered pace on the small downhill stretch of road towards the dimly lit intersection. Just ahead, another fully laden bus had safely navigated the intersection. Behind William's bus, another troop-filled bus closed in on the intersection. From the Wodonga train yard, Victorian Railways locomotive, a 2863 was making its way in the dark towards the Talangata crossing. The engine was travelling in reverse, tender first, visibility restricted, its crew navigating under strict wartime blackout conditions, no headlights, no warning glow, just a heavy locomotive moving through the night at 19 miles per hour towards the Bandiana turntable to pick up carriages. 2 vehicles, 1 crossing, no margin for error. The Talangata railway crossing was ungated, unprotected, unlit, with no audible signals. As the locomotive steamed towards the crossing, Engineer Cunningham blew his train whistle 3 times. William Lord, distracted by the noise of the joyful souls in his care that evening, didn't hear the train's warning. At 18:25 hours, unaware of the train's presence, William Lord's bus eased forward onto the unlit crossing. At that same moment, the dark, silhouetted 120-ton steam locomotive. A 2863 also reached the intersection of road and rail. The hulking, steaming monolith remained unseen. There was no time for warning, no time for evasive action. The collision was instantaneous, a single thunderous eruption in the darkness. A blow so loud, so violent, that it shattered the night and changed countless lives in the space of a heartbeat. The locomotive struck the bus broadside, splintering the wooden body into fragments, dragging the wreckage down the line in a grinding roar that shattered the night and littered the road with its vulnerable passengers. 19 passengers were killed instantly. Lieutenant Lyle Brinsmead, aged 25, Lieutenant Harry Parkinson, aged 23, Warrant Officer Robert Fruin, 26, Warrant Officer George Rose, 28, Warrant Officer Noel Mills, 29, Acting Sergeant Ernest Nairn, 24, Lance Corporal Richard Dunn, aged 27, and Private Sylvester Daly, 45, Albert Goddard, 22, Roy Barnes, 34, Cyril Alderton, 36, Frank Steele, 34, Boyce Mackenzie, 33, Ernest Johnson, 34, Arthur Neal, 28, Keith Hurst, the youngest of the victims at age 20, John Quinn, 27, George Nicole, 28, and Adrian Try, aged 32. The driver, William Lord, was thrown violently from the vehicle. His body later found beneath the railway lines in a cattle pit beside the track. 5 more passengers suffered crushing injuries to the head and chest. Private Ann Anderson, aged 27, Corporal William Roberts, aged 30, Lieutenant Alan Harris, aged 27, Sergeant Alexander McFarlane, 27, and Lance Corporal Keith Barnett, aged 28. 9 others were injured, but not critically. One woman, Margaret Malone, the only uninjured passenger, sat frozen in deep shock, unable to comprehend the devastation around her. The critically injured were rushed to 106 Australian General Hospital at Bone-Gilla, barely alive. Doctors and nurses worked with wartime urgency, fighting for every heartbeat. Despite every effort, Ann Anderson and William Roberts both died later that night. The next day, the toll deepened. Alan Harris, Alexander McFarlane, and Keith Barnett succumbed to their injuries, their bodies unable to withstand the trauma inflicted in those few terrible seconds on the tracks. In total, 25 lives were lost. The tragedy shook the region to its core as the entire country gasped at the scale of such loss. Families grieved, units counted the cost, while the country struggled to understand how such a preventable disaster could occur on home soil. On Tuesday, May 12, 1943, the border towns came to a standstill, shops closed, and factories fell silent. Schools paused their lessons, and workplaces emptied. Thousands lined the streets in stunned, respectful silence as a mile-long funeral procession began its slow journey from the army camp. Coffins draped in the Union Jack moved through Wodonga, across the very intersection of the crash, across the Victorian border and into the heart of Albury's city centre. People stood shoulder to shoulder, hats pressed to their chests, faces pale with shock and sorrow, as the long line of vehicles and mourners passed by. It was a moment unlike anything the region or country had ever witnessed. The procession continued to the quiet lawns of Albury War Cemetery, where the public was denied access. Here, beneath the autumn sky, the victims of the Wodonga Tragedy were laid to rest. Chaplains representing the various religious denominations spoke softly as voices trembled, and, as buglers played the last post, families clung to one another as the coffins descended into the earth simultaneously. 24 military lives, lost not to enemy fire, but to a preventable disaster on a dark Victorian evening. Their graves remain side by side, a solemn reminder of the fragility of life, the cost of wartime strain, and the tragedy that unfolded at 1825 hours on the 8th of May 1943. As the Wodonga victims were laid to rest, that same day, driver William Lord was farewelled in a private service surrounded by family at the Footscray Cemetery. For decades, the tragedy at Wodonga faded into the margins of wartime history, overshadowed by battles fought overseas, buried beneath official language and wartime necessity. But thanks to the work of Brisbane-based author and ex-soldier Andrew Johnston, these stories are no longer lost to time. Driven by a determination to uncover the truth, Andrew's meticulous research cuts through decades of silence and assumption. His work brings hidden facts to light, the overlooked decisions, the systemic failures, and the causal factors that shaped the Wodonga tragedy. Through his investigation, and with assistance from the Wodonga and District Historical Society, long-buried questions finally find their answers. His book, Death by Misadventure, The True Story of the Wodonga Tragedy, restores dignity to the victims, gives voice to the families, and confronts the uncomfortable truth that not all wartime casualties occur on battlefields. Some happen at home, in places meant to be safe. Their stories matter. Their lives mattered. And today, more than 80 years later, we remember them. All of them. Thank you for watching and for helping keep their memory alive. To explore the full story, discover Death by Misadventure, The True Story of the Wodonga Tragedy by Brisbane-based author Andrew Johnston. Visit andrewjohnstonbooks.com or look for Andrew's other work on Amazon. A Time to Return, a gripping fictional story combining the struggles of POWs in World War II and the supernatural phenomena of past life entities. All Lives Lost, the complete untold story of the 1943 Archerfield air tragedy, and The Forgotten Rising Suns details the tragic underground explosion at Wagga Wagga in May 1945, which claimed the lives of 26 soldiers.